We're not in the studio. No, we're at the ocean. This is the Pacific Ocean. We're not in the studio. I am Joseph, and this is Input English. I'm returning to the scene of the crime. I'd like to share something with you today that should be fun. As you know, or as you probably know, the weather here in Northern California has been pretty inhospitable to those of us who want to film outdoors. And so instead of going to the park and setting up and sitting and talking, I've been in the studio. When I first started making videos for Input English, I didn't know how to do it. And so I just went out and started making videos. And this park is the first place I tried to make videos. And I came face to face with my own problems, my own lack of confidence, and my own lack of expertise. I set up a tripod, I started filming, and then people came by and stared at me. And I felt very embarrassed, very self-conscious, and then I got angry. I got angry at them for my problems. So I turned off the recording and stormed off trying to find a better place. The trouble is, the problem kept coming along with me because the problem was me. The problem was not the people who were curious about this fellow who at a certain age is sitting there staring at a camera, talking to a camera. I was unusual. They were curious. They were being normal, and I was showcasing my problems. So enough of this self-confession nonsense. This is the Pacific Ocean, and behind me is Monterey Bay. If you go straight that way about 38 miles, you will be in the town of Monterey. It's a beautiful town, and I plan on filming there in the future, in this spring or early spring, when the weather is this nice. This area was subjected to a lot of storm damage. We had some vicious storms with huge surf, big waves, and it was very destructive. So they've got some repairs to do to the structures here. A lot of this stuff that I'm looking at was damaged by recent storms. We made national news when the pier at Santa Cruz was subtotally demolished by a giant wave. And it was a curiosity because there were three, as I recall, three construction workers on the structure when it collapsed into the sea. And we saw footage of these people standing on the floating wreckage of this pier that had been knocked loose. They were all rescued. Nobody died. Nobody was severely injured, but it was exciting in a bad sort of a way. So what do we have here? Well, the tide is relatively high. I've been here before, and this is not low tide. This is high tide, or relatively high tide. There are a moderate number of people enjoying the park because the weather is great. It's 62 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's short sleeve weather. It's beautiful. As I turn around a little bit, you can see a hill or a cliff behind me. We would call that a bluff. A bluff is a cliff, maybe a rounded cliff. Typically, a bluff is near water, adjacent to an ocean, adjacent to a riverbed. A bluff is a raised area, high area of land overlooking typically water. There's no federal law that in order for it to be a bluff, there has to be water present. It's just, that's the tendency, is when we say bluff, it tends to be overlooking water. The sand here is neither black nor white. It's relatively fine. It's relatively clean. There's not a lot of trash, garbage, pollution. No, this is a nice beach. The water, ocean water, can be very different depending upon where you are. And when I took trips to the Caribbean, I was astonished at how clear and clean the water was, even in the surf zone. So this surf zone, the water is kind of cloudy. It's not beautiful blue water, clear water. It's a little bit on the gray side, but that's normal for here, and it's not because of pollution. It's because of very fine sediment that's suspended in the water. Now, over my shoulder, you can see a ship, or the ruins of a ship, the remnants of a ship. That's the wreck of the SS Palo Alto. The Palo Alto was a ship that was built as I believe it was a tanker or a freighter. It was built during World War I in the United States, and it was kind of an experiment. It was made out of cement, more specifically ferro cement. So to build that ship, they set up a skeleton of reinforcing steel and structural members, and then they coated it with a marine preparation of cement. It's made out of concrete. We just call it the cement ship. Very seldom does anyone call it the Palo Alto. It was built too late in the war to see any use. After the war, it was used briefly, and then it was mothballed. Now, mothballed is a metaphor that we use frequently in terms of ships. That is, if you want to use it again, you put it aside, but you preserve it so that you can come back and use it later. So it's a term of art in the U.S. Navy that a ship or a facility can be mothballed. That is, it's set up for preservation for future reuse. So that ship was mothballed, and then they realized they were never going to use it, and so they beached it here on purpose. Now the ocean doesn't tolerate that very well, and so what happened is, over the years, that wreck was destroyed by the surf. There's a tremendous amount of energy in this surf zone, and it's made much stronger when storms come through, so that ship actually broke up during a storm. When we first moved to this area, it was intact, and you could go out to it, although I don't think we were allowed on it. They used to have a dock, a pier that led out to it so that you could get right to it. And then after we moved here, a big storm, it broke up, and it's now in pieces. Over my shoulder here, you can see that beyond the water, there is a town, and that is Santa Cruz. And they have a pier, well, they have what's left of a pier because a recent storm destroyed much of it. This beach is a fantastic place to walk, meditate, listen to podcasts, spend time with oneself, gathering thoughts. With every step, you come in contact with things that are interesting, different. What sort of stones are these? What sort of log is that? Gives me a sense of discovery. This is an interesting piece. This is just a stone that I picked up, and you can see it. This is called a concretion. And so the word concretion is a technical term in geology, but it has the same root as concrete. That is, it is something that came together to form a mass. And as you look at this, you can see shells. Lots of different kinds of shells embedded in this. So this used to be shells that were embedded in sand, and then the sand solidified into this rock, and this is a concretion geology terminology. We did a lot of walking along the beach in Florida, and of course it's a very different environment in Florida. In Florida you don't see these large round stones like we have here, and you see a lot more marine life that washes up. This is a piece of granite. Granite is an igneous rock. It was made by volcanic activity. There's a lot of it here, but it has, if you look at igneous rock, they usually have very sharp angles and sharp corners when they fracture, but this is all very rounded. So that tells us that this rock spent a lot of time in this surf zone being tumbled and shaped into what looks like a river stone. This has been a fun walk. I found myself thinking like a child. I can remember going to the ocean for the first time and being very worried that the incoming wave would be overwhelming and could represent some sort of danger. And I found myself looking at all these rocks, all these funny rocks. There's a term of art that we use in the United States for someone who's interested in rocks, and that is they are a rockhound. And a rockhound is an interesting concept. It's somebody who likes rocks. Maybe they like to collect them. Maybe they like to identify them. Maybe they like crystals. There are lots of hobbyists who will cut stones and make things. They'll make jewelry. And my parents actually got into that when I was a kid. They became rockhounds. And I can remember my dad bought a rock hammer, and he was unencumbered by any knowledge of how to use it, but we had a rock hammer, and then he set up some machinery so that we could cut stones into little slabs and make little ovals and then grind them and make jewelry. And I made jewelry as a kid with rocks that we found in places like this, like right here. You find a rock you like, you take it back to the shop, you cut it, and maybe you look at it after you cut it and you think, well, that didn't turn out very good, and you throw it away and you go get another one. As a young kid, probably 10, 12, 14 years old, I was a rockhound. I talked to one of the fishermen because I was curious, if somebody is fishing here, what's the scoop? What are they trying to do? And what he told me is that he was fishing for surf perch. He indicated that they were around a foot long and he was catching them, but then I noticed that he had none with him. And he said, oh, that's simple. I turned them all loose. So he's here for the time alone, doing something fun, but he's not here trying to gather food or remove fish from the ecosystem. He is here for recreational purposes, and all the fish he caught were released. It occurs to me that one of the things that could come out of this video is a regret that I didn't bring a hat and sunblock. I may wind up with a sunburn, but that will result in better planning on future trips. This will not be the last time we come here. One of the things we're going to discover is the sound of these waves and whether they interfere with you hearing my voice. I have my microphone set up with sound cancellation, and it's got this this fuzzy thing on the microphone. It has a funny slang technical name. It's called a dead cat. Now, bear in mind, no cats are involved and no cats died, but a fuzzy thing that you put over a microphone to get rid of wind noise is called a dead cat. So hopefully the sound of the surf will not be a problem for you. I just stopped and talked to a lady who had an interesting tool with her. It was a stick. I should have asked her what it was. It was a stick with a basket on it, and she uses it to pick up rocks. And so I asked, what are you doing? I actually impersonated the voice of a friend of mine when I was living in the deep south. This fellow, a very interesting coworker, didn't ask, what are you doing? He would say, what you doing? And he had that same sing-songy, strange delivery that was so charming. And so when I walked up to her to ask her what she was doing, I naturally dropped into his method of speaking, and I just said, what you doing? And then she told me what they're looking for is sea glass. So glass bottles, various kinds of glass, wind up in the ocean. But as you know, glass doesn't really deteriorate except by being broken up into smaller pieces. And so glass in the surf zone gets rounded and polished much the way that piece of granite that I showed you earlier got rounded. And so sea glass is actually collected by people, and they make jewelry out of it. There are people who make sea glass. They'll put glass into a tumbler and make something that looks like sea glass. But she was collecting little pieces of various colored glass. She was very proud of a piece of blue glass. She said, I don't see a lot of blue glass. Okay, so we've been here long enough, and I've made enough footage that I can issue a report, and that is, this is a very different experience than what it was like when I came here as a video newbie. I had a lot of baggage when I was trying to make video. I was trying to be perfect. I wanted the videos to be perfect. I had a lot of opinions about how this was supposed to go. And those opinions were very inhibitory. They interfered with what I was doing. They prevented me from filming here. Now, more than 6 months later, I come back to the same beach, encountering ostensibly the same people, but I'm not angry that they're in my footage. I'm not embarrassed by them. And the reason I tell you all this is it is in parallel with the way we deal with language learning. One of the big obstacles that I had in dealing with language learning was embarrassment that I was going to make mistakes. And then along the way, somebody said, hey, making mistakes is part of the process, and you need to embrace your mistakes. You don't make them on purpose, but if you make a mistake talking to somebody and you use the wrong word, unless they punch you in the nose, it's going to be okay. So I don't worry about making mistakes. And out here making this video, I'm not worried about what other people are saying or thinking. Basically, they don't care. They don't care. It's a very different vibe. It's the same beach, basically the same people, but a very different experience. This has been a lot of discovery. So as I look down here, here's a stone that has been worked in the surf zone. It's been shaped by being tossed in the surf. But on closer inspection, this is not a stone. This is a piece of brick. This is a piece of red brick. It's man-made, but it's been in the surf zone being shaped. It's got a surface on it that's very flat, and it almost looks like it's charred, like maybe it was around a fireplace or something like that. It's a piece of brick. The other thing that gets shaped in the surf zone here is wood. There are a lot of pieces of wood that have been tossed and ground and shaped. And of course, we have a term for that. There's a word for everything. And so wood that is from the surf zone, we refer to as driftwood. But when it's on the beach, it's not drifting any longer, but it still is called driftwood. Wood that comes from the sea, wood that's been changed by the sea, driftwood. So this is all these fragments of wood that you see here are driftwood. Driftwood need not be in the ocean. It can also be seen in a freshwater setting. When we were traveling to Canada on those epic family trips way back when, there was a lot of driftwood. That is, there were a lot of pieces of wood, fragments of trees, branches of trees that spent a lot of time in the water. The bark would deteriorate, the denser wood would survive, and then it would wash up on the shore and be dried, and there was a lot of driftwood there. When I first got here, the waves seemed to be bigger. Looks like the trend is toward lower surf, a milder surf. It's not as noisy as it was. These waves travel across the ocean for considerable distance, but when they get into shallow areas, the wave interacts with the land, and then you see the waves break as they come close to the shore. So as you look at a wave that's rounded and it's coming closer and closer to shore, the top of it curls over and breaks. And when the wave breaks, that tells you that the wave is getting pretty close to shore. This area is popular among surfers. There are a lot of surfers. I don't see any here in this area. They may not allow surfing in this park. I see none, but there's a lot of surfing in the Santa Cruz area. Marine life in this area we don't really see, but it's there. There are whales not too far offshore. When we sailed our boat out into Monterey Bay, out of Santa Cruz, we saw whales. They are there. The geology of Monterey Bay is interesting. There is a super deep trench about halfway across. What we are told is that the ocean currents will bring nutrients from deep and bring it up to the surface, and that attracts whales who come into Monterey Bay for feeding. If you look online, you can see pictures of whales feeding in Monterey Bay. It's not uncommon. In this area, the whales are eating krill. Krill are tiny animal forms floating in the water, little miniature shrimp, a lot of larval forms, little tiny creatures floating in the currents. And a lot of these whales are filter feeders. They have plates of baleen in their mouth, in their oropharynx, and they can filter the krill out of the water and obtain nutrients that way. In order to get krill out of this water, you have to process a lot of water. There are great white sharks here, and every now and then there is a shark attack. A surfer is the most likely person to be attacked by a great white. It does happen here, not very often. When it does, it's usually a tragedy. It's very sensational. We just don't see it very often, thank goodness. But there are great white sharks in these waters. Talking to people today, there's a sense of relief. I'm not the only one who's been stuck indoors because of difficult weather. Basically, everybody out here is enjoying a beautiful day and the freedom that you get going outdoors when the weather is hospitable like this. Well, this has been a lovely walk, and to quote William Shakespeare, "'Tis enough, 'twill serve." If you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.